Okay, so I think I should probably start this video by saying Happy New Year. Can't believe it's my first video in 2012. Thank you for all the messages and everything. I haven't been dead, obviously. I've just been working quite a lot over the last couple of months. Quite shocking actually, my last video was before Christmas. I'll try not to leave it so long this time. But I am back with another Amiga related video. Now this time I've just been home for the weekend as it was a family birthday. And thought I'd take the opportunity to have a little bit of a route around the attic and find out some more of my old Amiga possessions that have been lurking up there. And that did bring me to quite an interesting discovery. I found a few old boxes filled with old Amiga magazines. Now, back in the 90s, I was a little bit of an avid collector of Amiga magazines, and I've still got, I think there was probably around like 6 boxes worth in my parents' attic. Now, they live about 200 miles away from where I do, so it wasn't possible to bring them all here. I only live in like a 2-bedroom flat. I really don't have the room to keep them all here. But I did go through a few of the boxes and I thought this would make quite a nice little video to kind of look back on some of the magazines. I mean, I'm doing this from a UK perspective. I know that there were magazines like Amiga World that were very popular in the US, but over here, the main ones I'm going to go through, I'll actually move the camera down and we'll have a little bit of a desk view and I'll kind of show you some of the issues of Amiga magazines that I brought back with me. Okay then, so I'm going to try and keep this video quite brief. I've got quite a lot to get through, but I thought I'd start with the big Amiga magazine. Now, back in the early 90s, in around 1992, Amiga Format was actually the best-selling consumer magazine. Now, I'm not just talking computer magazines here. This actually outsold stuff like DIY, home decorating, music magazines. It was absolutely massive for a time. Now, I started buying Amiga Format in around 1992. However, the earliest copies I've got here seem to be from 94. But as you can see, it was, a very slick, well-produced magazine, very thick as well, averaged at about, 300 or 400 pages. And this issue we've got here, we've got 3 cover discs with it as well. Now, generally what you get is you get a full-price commercial piece of software that was generally a couple of years old. I mean, you'd find things on the cover disc that was kind of like an older version of a new product, so you might get given last year's edition of it to try and increase sales for the new one. They give away like the old edition of it. They'd often make big bold claims like 300 or 400 pounds worth of free software on here. So yeah, it often came with 3 discs. You get some productivity and serious ones, and also usually a game demo as well. And this edition here was actually from the month that Commodore declared bankruptcy. As you can see, it says shock news, turn to page 18. So if we have a look forward, there we go, the story of Commodore being up for sale. It was also split into a few different sections. You had a section called Screenplay that was dedicated to gaming, which was obviously quite a big attraction to the Amiga platform, particularly in the UK. It was a very popular gaming platform. So they dedicate a good chunk of the magazine over to gaming. We're talking like a good, probably about 100 pages worth here. It was a lot. Then you get to the back, that'd be where the serious applications were. You get serious reviews, hardware, and public domain. And they'd also do tutorials in the back section, like one here for Music X that they'd given away in a previous month. Blitz Basic, that was another full commercial software suite they gave away. And you get letters at the back of the magazine as well that were always quite a good read. And they'd always have a monthly section where they'd invite you to write in and get your question answered by David Pleasance, who was the managing director of Commodore UK. There'd be a reader gallery section down the bottom here where users could submit artwork they'd made on the Amiga. And then the back, classified ads really. You also saw a lot of these in Amiga Format. Build muscles fast. They'd be in like every month. Must have thought we were all like, puny pasty nerds, which to be fair was probably true. And also we've got another magazine, another issue here from 1994 as well. This one just before the downfall of Commodore, looking at the ill-fated CD1200 add-on. Now this was meant to be a CD-ROM drive from Commodore to connect to the Amiga 1200. And looking back at this actually, it looks like it was in a pretty finished state actually. I mean, I've seen some pictures online of like prototypes, but they never look this finished. I wonder what ever happened to that. I think it was from Commodore Germany, if you read the report where this was unveiled at the CeBIT show in 1994. So I'm wondering, after the bankruptcy of Commodore, whatever happened to that prototype? Must be out there somewhere. Yeah, revealed in Germany it was. That's definitely something worth tracking down. Also, Amiga Format would release an annual every year as well, which was kind of a look back at the highlights of the last 12 months to do the predictions for the year ahead, which probably were all completely false, as Commodore didn't make it, did they? Kind of a sad look, actually. Also, they do like a look back at the best games of the year, the best serious software. The CD32 had just come out a few months before, so towards the Amiga 9000, apparently. It's an interesting historical look back. That's a hard disk and a half, isn't it? So the Amiga Format Annual was definitely worth a read at the end of every year. Very bizarre picture of the Amiga 1200 there. Why on earth would you flip it like that? Strange decision there by the art designer. So yeah, I mean, I think they released about 4 of these. That was quite a good read every year. And Amiga Format went through some changes in the post-Commodore years. I mean, these are 94, 95. This would be like the ongoing look at what the Commodore bankruptcy was going like. It went on for a long time, actually. Yeah, around this time, Commodore UK were attempting to buy the parent company, which didn't happen in the end. It went to a company called Escom, as we all know. And then I don't think though that wasn't my favourite era of Amiga Format. I actually preferred Amiga Format in the later years. When we look here at like these issues from 1998 and 1999, the Amiga scene was a lot smaller by then. So the magazine kind of took a different approach. It became a lot more kind of a hobbyist publication. I mean, gone are the days when it was selling 400,000 copies a month. And the Amiga community by then was a lot smaller, but obviously stuff like commercial games were a bit thin on the ground. So they're doing a lot more kind of hobbyist articles, like here we're looking at, wiring up a standard AT keyboard to your Amiga, and I think they did an article where they hacked a Zorro slot into an Amiga 500 at one point. So, I think for me, this was probably one of the more exciting eras of the Amiga magazines, because around this time they did a lot to bring the community together. It was kind of just before the age that everybody had the internet at home, or if you did, it was expensive dial-up and an early digital camera there from 1998. Yes, they did do a lot actually to bring it together, and they also did they invited readers to write reviews for them by this point as well, which were also always really interesting. And I believe one of these has actually got a look at user groups as well. Yeah, user groups. So they'd often go around and do reports from, communities of Amiga users around the country, which was always really interesting. It took a lot more of a serious kind of role by then, as the days of the Amiga being a game machine had kind of, faded by then. Like looking at the PowerPC chip here, whether it would be a good choice for the Amiga. As we know, that's what they went with, for better or worse. So, by this point, it was a lot smaller than it had been in previous years. If we compare, an issue from 1999 and one from 1994, you can see, about a third of the size. By this point, though, it was still bound by the side there. It was, still thick enough to be this style. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. During its final year in 2000, it went to a very thin staple band format, and the price I think was increased to it was nearly the £6 mark by then. And then the final edition did come in May 2000, 1989 to 2000 Amiga Format Collector's Edition, and this was the very last issue that was ever published. Leading news, Amiga Format to close, and all of the team went down for a beer in the afternoon, did some reminiscing about the Amiga Format years and their memories of the Amiga as well. So it was quite a good nostalgic issue. There were some sad things in it as well. The fact that they were doing some tutorials at the time that obviously never got finished. So we never got to see chapter 13. By this point as well, they had the Sabrina Online comic strip by Eric Schwartz down the bottom on the letters pages. It was always a good laugh. I think by the looks of it, the closure of Amiga Format was kind of a bit of a last-minute thing, as it's referenced in a couple of bits in the magazine, but there were still a few bits where it's like, join us next month for more on this. Another Amiga User Group report there. And they ran a thing called the Amiga Format Bulletin, which was a mailing list, which I'm not sure if that's still going, actually. Maybe. Then the team at the end there saying goodbye to the community. So that was Amiga Format. Now, the main competitor to Amiga Format in the UK was CU Amiga, that originally started life back in the Commodore 64 era, known as Commodore User. And again, it had a very similar style to Amiga Format. It was kind of a mixture of games and serious software as well. Here we're looking at an issue from 1992 where the new Amiga 4000 was the key feature, and a preview of Amiga OS 3.0 there. I remember reading this and, being very interested back then as an Amiga OS 2.0 user. A look around the AGA chipset, an advert there from Commodore for the CD-TV, which they were branding the Amiga CD-TV by this point. Obviously kind of doing away with the home multimedia image of the machine and now bundling a keyboard and disk drive and everything with it. Still didn't take off though. Games Master Live 1994. There we go, there's some memories for you. A bit of nostalgia there. A section on which Amiga to pick. I mean, we're looking at 1992 here. So the Amiga 1200 hadn't been announced. The 600 was still the main home machine. CD-TV and a few of the big box Amigas at the top. Therefore, Lemmings to the Tribes. Then we go to the gaming section in the middle. Very similar layout to Amiga Format in many ways. And CU Amiga and Amiga Format often had a little bit of a jab at each other on which one would be the best-selling Amiga magazine. You'd often see the strap lines at the top interchange between the two magazines, depending on which one had sold more copies that month. Similar to Amiga Format, actually, by 1997, CU Amiga had turned into a more hobbyist kind of vibe about the magazine. Amiga Format and CU both did CD-ROMs actually by this point. I think I always preferred CU Amiga CD-ROMs. I thought they were laid out a bit nicer and it was a bit easier to find things. And they generally had better software on it as well, I think. Not that Amiga Formats weren't worth buying, I used to get them both every month. But yeah, there was also some nice hobbyist features by this point, how to put your Amiga 1200 in a tower. And also, speaking of serious magazines, actually this was the first Amiga magazine I ever bought, Amiga Shopper. Now, this was from Future Publishing, the company that produced Amiga Format, but this was much cheaper than Amiga Format. I think this was about £1, £1.25. Originally introduced at 99p, and it was a black and white publication originally that boasted about the fact that they only covered serious software. There was no games. It was looking at hardware. There was a lot of tutorials in here as well. The section here on doing ham radio with the Amiga. A massive answers section. They do a lot of readers' questions and answers. They dedicate a good proportion of the magazine to that. There's also some good features as well on programming they do every month as well. Desktop publishing we've got there. And they regularly did something called Cracking the Shell that I used to... Here we go. This was kind of a monthly Amiga DOS tutorial by Mark Smitty, who was very good actually. I'd often follow these and it would teach you a lot about the Amiga DOS. So Amiga Shopper, it was an essential buy for me, pretty much all the way through its run actually. Now it started at £1.25, it was quite a thick publication as well. Eventually went full colour by 94 when Commodore were going bust, as we can see in this issue here from July 1994. And then they did introduce cover discs a bit further down the line. Never cover CDs, but the price increased to £4.50. Like with Amiga Format, it went thinner and thinner until it became staple bound. And it did kind of get to the stage where you pay nearly £5 an issue here in 1996, and I think we're talking something like, it was 48 pages long. It did kind of get to a point where it was kind of quite hard to justify buying it for the small amount of content that you get in it. But everything they did, I think by this point actually, Amiga Shopper was being written by the Amiga Format journalists kind of in their spare time. I think I remember reading. But, the quality was still there though. I did buy it right up until the final issue Amiga Shopper, I think it always had a special place in my heart, just because it was the one magazine that, I'd pretty much find everything in it was interesting. So that's Amiga Shopper. Another one that I used to buy quite regularly was Amiga User International. Now, I wouldn't get this every month. I'd only get it if something kind of took my interest on the front. But I think when we were in the cover disc era, before the CDs came along, the Amiga User International cover discs were probably the best ones. They'd often cram in 5 floppy disks onto 2, so you'd have to unarchive them. And they had some quite, it generally became a bit more of an all-round technology magazine towards its later years, because Amiga content was a bit thin on the ground. But, they did go quite in depth, and it was more of a serious vibe in this magazine too. It felt a bit more kind of tabloidy than Amiga Shopper. It wasn't quite as serious, but it was definitely a good read. And I think this was another magazine that kind of just slipped away, actually. I'm not sure if the final issue even ever got published. I believe there is still a website up for it, though, or at least there was a couple of years ago. So this is quite a good example of their style. They'd often do field reports, like a trip to NASA here, where they look at NASA using the Amiga, which they did, yeah. They used Amiga 4000s, I believe, in launching rockets. Report here with Fred Fish, rest in peace. So that's Amiga User International. We also had Amiga Computing magazine as well. That was this is another one that I wouldn't necessarily buy every month, but if something interesting was on it, I would. They often had very good cover discs as well. Again, it was a similar kind of style to Amiga Format and CU Amiga, really. Kind of an equal split between games and productivity. An in-depth report on the rip page here. The Amiga CD32 there, that's just been announced this month. So this kind of had a bit more of reminded me a bit more of stuff like Computer Shopper and PC magazines, really. It was a good read, though. And then in later years, that kind of shrunk to incorporate its former sister publication, Amiga Action, which was a gaming magazine. Now, this was, I think we're talking about 97, January 97. So by then, Amiga Action, which was a gaming publication, had closed down. They'd rebranded the gaming pages in Amiga Computing as Amiga Action. The magazine kind of went down to a smaller page size and got thinner, and then eventually vanished. And then something quite interesting came along that bucked the trend in late 1999. That was a magazine called Amiga Active that I remember going into a newsagent one day, and it was around the time that a lot of the Amiga magazines were closing down, and then seeing this brand new magazine for the Amiga. Did a bit of a double take, and I was like, wow. Now this came out a few months after CU Amiga closed down, so it was actually a lot of the old CU Amiga team they got together and basically launched this new mag. So the vibe of it was very similar to CU Amiga, even admitting themselves we must be mad to launch a new Amiga magazine. But it was around the time that Gateway had given up on the Amiga, that sold it off to Amiga Inc., I believe. Or maybe just before, it was around the Jim Collas era. So, there's a lot of enthusiasm in the scene then. I mean, it didn't last very long, I don't think. I think we only got about a year's worth of issues. I bought most of them, but I think I did kind of drop off towards the end of the run. I think I bought the last issue of Amiga Active, and then it got relaunched as Digital or something like that it was called, and I didn't even see any of those around, but it was a very good read while it lasted, and it was actually the final commercial Amiga magazine that you'd see in the shops over here in the UK, and it came with a cover disc every month as well that was also up there with the quality set by Amiga Format and CU Amiga. So that was definitely a worthwhile buy. And now there is actually still an Amiga magazine in production, and it's called Amiga Future. And you might not be familiar with this one. It's something, again, I did have a year's subscription to it, but then I kind of waned a bit, but I've actually just subscribed to it again recently. And it also comes with a cover CD-ROM on the front as well. And it's published in Germany, but they do both English language editions of it. Now, it used to be completely black and white. I haven't got a copy of the latest issue to show you yet, but they've actually made the transition to full colour recently. And as you'd expect, it focuses a bit more on the current Amiga scene. So we get reviews of Amiga OS4 and MorphOS software, Amiga Forever, new releases reviewed there, interviews with people that are working in the Amiga scene now, tutorials. There's also some quite interesting stuff here as well. Some hardware hacks and things as well. So this is a hobbyist magazine in its truest form. It's made by Amiga fans, not for profit, even though it does retail at €8 for the CD edition or 5 without. It's it is a really good read actually. There's some very interesting articles in there, and it's just nice to have an Amiga magazine still in production in 2012. So there we go then, a little look back at some of my memories of Amiga magazines over the years. I hope you enjoyed it.